Okay, so this video is going to cover the first chapter of improving vocabulary skills. I recommend that you follow along in your book. Open up to page 8 as we go along. Now, what we're going to do as we go through this book is to pay particular attention to the parts of speech of the words that we're learning, because what I've noticed in the past is that ESL students will learn the meaning of a word, but they can't use it in a sentence because they use it as a wrong part of speech. So for example, they have a noun but they use it as a verb, or they have a verb and they use it as an adjective. So really understanding a word means not just knowing the meaning of the word, but also knowing how that word is used. So as we go through, there's some parts of words, prefixes and suffixes, that will give us clues as to what part of speech it is. So I'll be highlighting those as we go along. I encourage you in your book, circle those parts of speech or those parts of the words in your book. So let me just go ahead and read through these words first. Absolve, Adamant, Amiable. Now Amiable is our first one that has a clue. Now it ends in able, and most of the time words that end with that are adjectives. Our next one's amoral, animosity. There's another clue. The ty or ity tell us that it is a noun. Antagonist, another clue there. Ist, this one tells us it's a noun, and particularly ist normally means a person who does something. A person who does something. Eccentric, there's kind of a clue. Ic, words that end in ic are often adjectives, but not all the time. Encounter, that er is often a noun. Epitome, and malign. So let's go to the first word. Absolve. Since there was not enough evidence of his guilt, the jury had to absolve Mr. Melman of the murder. Accused of taking bribes, the mayor said, "In the end, I'll clear my name and be absolved of any wrongdoing." So what absolve means is to clear from guilt. If you look on page 9, absolve is number 4, to find innocent or blameless. Basically what absolve means is that you have been accused of doing something wrong. That thing that you did wrong could be a crime. So in the first example, the crime the person was accused of was murder. But it could also be that you're accused of just doing something wrong, of cheating, say cheating on a test. You could be absolved from cheating on a test, meaning that it's proven that you didn't do it. Another way to think about this word is to set or declare someone free from blame or responsibility. So absolves means that you're not, you didn't do something wrong, or you're not responsible for doing something wrong. Okay. Moving on to the next one. This one is adamant, and this one's an adjective. Ron is adamant about not changing plans. He insists we should still camp out even though the weather report now says it will be cold and rainy. Adamant in his support of gun control, Senator Keene won't give in to pressure from powerful opponents. So adamant means firm. On page number 9, it's number 1, not giving in, stubborn. Okay. So there is, if any of you guys read comic books, particularly the X-Men, or if you've seen those movies, there's a character whose name is Wolverine, and he has claws that come out of his hands, and his bones are covered in a metal, imaginary metal called adamantium, right? And this is supposed to be an unbreakable metal. So the word adamant means that something is firm and won't break, won't change, is unchanging. When we talk about adamant about a person, we normally connect it with a specific thing. So in the first example, he's adamant about not changing his plans. We're not going to just say that someone is adamant. Whereas we can say that someone is stubborn, we can't just say someone is adamant without talking about what specifically is it that they're not willing to change or they're not willing to give in about. So another way to think about adamant is refusing to be persuaded or change one's mind. Okay, but again, it needs to be connected to some idea. About not changing plans about something specific. It can't be used just generally. Our next word here is amiable, and this one is an adjective. My amiable dog greets both strangers and old friends with a happy yip and energetic tail wagging. At first, our history teacher didn't seem very friendly, but once you get to know her, she shows her amiable side. So what amiable means is good-natured. On page number 9, amiable is number 10. It says good-natured, friendly, and pleasant. So amiable is a word that comes from Latin. So if you're a French or if you're a Spanish speaker, my guess is that you have a word that's very, very similar in your language. If you're not, I'm sorry. But what amiable means is someone who is friendly or who is eager to be or willing to be friends. Someone who gets along easily with others and is nice. Another way of thinking about it is having or displaying a friendly and pleasant manner. So if we think about a person who's an amiable, in general we like to have teachers, or I like to have teachers who are amiable, which means that they're friendly. They're not mean. They're not overly serious, but they are friendly and they have a good nature to them. All right. So moving on to the next one. This one is amoral, and this one is an adjective. Jerry is almost totally amoral. He cares only about making money and having fun and couldn't care less about right or wrong. The former president of Uganda, Idi Amin, was truly amoral. He jailed, tortured, and killed innocent opponents without the slightest feeling of guilt. So what amoral means is lacking ethical principles. If we look on page 9, it's number 2, lacking a moral sense without principles. Okay, so let's talk about what that means. If we look at the word, that's really made up of two parts. There's a and there's moral. Now in this case, a, when it's a prefix, it means not, or the opposite of something. So amoral means not moral. So what moral means is that moral means that you have a sense of what is right and what is wrong, and you act in that accordance. So we say the golden rule is treat other people as you want to be treated. Someone who is amoral doesn't follow those principles. They don't have a sense of what is right and wrong. Oftentimes they're only guided by their self-interests. Another way of thinking about this is lacking a moral sense, unconcerned with the rightness or wrongness of something. So in the first example, it says Jerry is completely amoral. He doesn't care whether it's right to make money or whether it's right to have fun. His principal concerns are making money whatever way he can, and having fun whatever way he can. In the second example, the leader of this country, he didn't feel bad at all about jailing or torturing or killing people. He didn't feel any guilt about that because he didn't have a sense of what was right and what was wrong. So our next one here is animosity, and this one ends in that ity, and this is a noun. I was shocked when Sandy said she hated Lionel. I'd never realized she felt such animosity towards him. The bad feelings between the two families go back so many generations that nobody remembers what originally caused the animosity. What animosity means is a strong dislike. I might even say a hatred. Um, but animosity on page number 9, it has it down as number 8, bitter hostility. Animosity is another word that is from Latin, and so again, French and Spanish speakers will probably have a word that's similar to this in your language, which will have a similar meaning. But animosity comes from the word animus, and what that means is that you have a feeling of hostility or hatred towards someone. So the difference between, say, hostility and hatred, and in this case the meaning of animosity, is that when you're hostile towards someone, it means that you have a desire to hurt that person or to have bad things happen towards that person. Hatred, it doesn't necessarily mean that you want something bad to it, but animosity has a sense of that you want something bad to happen to that person, or that you are maybe looking for a conflict or some sort of fight between you. So in the first example, when it says that she hated Lionel, when we add to that she felt such animosity, what that means is that she wishes bad for him, or she's actually in conflict in that one. In the second example, you're talking about the animosity between two families. There's a famous story in U.S. history about the Hatfields and the McCoys, which are these two families that for generation after generation kept on fighting each other. If we think about animosity, if you think about the situation in Israel Palestine, the feeling between Israeli, not all, but some Israelis towards Palestinians and some Palestinians towards Israelis is one of animosity, meaning that it's sort of a deep hatred and sort of a desire to harm the other side. Our next word here is antagonist, and this one is a noun. So I said before that this ist means a person who does something, and a person is always a noun. At the divorce hearing, the husband and wife were such bitter antagonists that it was hard to believe they'd once loved each other. In the ring, the two boxers were antagonists, but in their private lives, they were good friends. So an antagonist is an enemy. Now, if we think back to our last word, animosity, generally antagonists are going to feel animosity, right? Because if someone is your enemy, you're going to wish bad things and you're going to be actively in conflict with them. On page 9, it is number 7, an opponent who opposes or competes. So your antagonist, if you have an antagonist, it's the person who is fighting against you. Antagonist comes from the verb antagonize, and what antagonize means is to bother somebody. So the antagonist is the person who is in conflict with you, who is bothering you. Another way to think of it is a person who actively opposes or is hostile to someone or something. There's also the word adversary, is someone who you fight against. Those of you who may have gone to high school here may have heard this word antagonist when you studied literature, when you studied stories. We use this word antagonist and protagonist when we talk about literature. The antagonist is the person who is fighting against whoever the hero is of the story. And the protagonist is the hero of the story. It's a slightly different meaning, but hopefully you can see how it is related. Our next word here is eccentric, and this one is an adjective. Bruce is quite eccentric. For example, he lives in a circular house and rides to work on a motorcycle in a three-piece suit. Florence Nightingale, the famous nursing reformer, had the eccentric habit of carrying, a pet owl around in one of her pockets. So what eccentric means is odd. And by odd, we mean strange. On page number 9, eccentric is number 3. Differing from what is customary. Okay, so when we say odd in this sense, we're talking normally about a behavior that is that's not normal, that isn't what is ordinary, or in this case customary. We often use the word eccentric is actually a positive way of saying someone is odd. It means that someone is acting in a way that is different from the normal way for the person of that age and race and gender. Okay. Um, Oftentimes it has to do with the way a person dresses or the way a person behaves is eccentric. If you look at the picture there, you can see like these people are wearing eccentric costumes, and they have eccentric instruments. I don't know that I'd call their instruments eccentric, but their clothing and their way of dress is definitely different from the way you would normally think of it. Another way to think of it is when we're thinking of a person or their behavior, it's unconventional and slightly strange. So it's a little bit different from what is normal. I think that we all know, and maybe you can think of someone in our lives who we say there's an expression in English, they march to the beat of their own drum, meaning that they do things their own way. It's not necessarily bad, it's just different. All right, so our next one here is encounter. An encounter is a noun. Now you may have also heard the word encounter as a verb as well, and it is also a verb, but in this case we're focusing on the noun meaning. My encounter with Malik in a Los Angeles supermarket surprised me, since I thought he still lived in Chicago. I dislike returning to my small hometown, where I'm likely to have encounters with people who knew me as a troubled child. So encounter means a meeting. Now, one thing you want to pay attention to is what comes after these words. So oftentimes you'll have words that are accompanied by certain prepositions in general. So in this case we have in both of these sentences encounter being followed by with. Now this doesn't have to happen all the time, but it will happen often enough that it's a good thing to pay attention to. So encounter on page number 9 is number 5, a brief or unexpected meeting. So there's two things to keep in mind about this. An encounter, first of all, is a meeting, but it's one that is short, and meaning brief, and it's not planned. So I wouldn't say, I have an encounter with at my business at 7 o'clock, because that's a planned meeting, and it's also likely not to be short. An encounter is more, we say, when you run into someone, when you're out at the grocery store and you see someone you know. That's an encounter. Even if you see someone you don't know and you talk to them for a short amount of time, that's also an encounter. So the important things to keep in mind is that it's an unexpected experience that is not long in duration, and tends to be a casual meeting rather than a formal meeting. Okay, so our next one here is epitome. This one's sort of a weird looking word and is hard to pronounce at first, but it's epitome, and this is a noun. To many, the epitome of cuteness is a furry, round-eyed puppy. The great ball player and civil rights leader Jackie Robinson was the epitome of both physical and moral strength. So what epitome means is a perfect model. Okay, a perfect model of. And again, like I said with the last one, with encounter, we want to look at what's the preposition that this is often matched with. And we see epitome is followed by of in both of those cases. On page number 9, epitome is number 6, a perfect or typical example. Okay, so epitome, when we talk about epitome, the way that I think of it in my mind, which may or may not help you, is that it's the peak. So the peak is the top, the top of the mountain. So an epitome of something means the best example of something, the perfect example of something. So when you say that someone is the epitome of something, as long as that thing you're saying is good, it's a compliment. You could say he's the epitome of evil, which is not a compliment, but it means the person is the best example of that they capture it. Another way to think about it is a person or thing that's a perfect example of a particular quality or type. So in the first example, this is the thing that we're trying to describe is cuteness. So it's saying for a lot of people, a little puppy, a little dog, right, is that, it perfectly defines the word cuteness, right? In the second one, Jackie Robinson, there was a movie out recently, I think it was called 41. Jackie Robinson was the first African American or black baseball player to play in the major leagues, the MLB. He was a great player. But two, because he was the first black player, he also had to have a lot of moral strength because there were a lot of other people a lot of people who didn't like him and said some horrible things towards him. So he's a perfect example of a combination of physical and moral strength. All right, and here we are. Our last word here is malign, and malign is a verb. That vicious Hollywood reporter often maligns movie stars, forever damaging their public images. Stacy refuses to malign her ex-husband, even though he was the one who insisted on the divorce. So malign means to speak ill of. Now again, this is a word that I believe comes from Latin, and my guess is that Spanish and French speakers will have a word that is similar in your language. In fact, the mal, or the part of it, is, in Spanish is bad. So what malign means is, on page number 9, it's number 9, to make evil and often untrue statements about, speak evil of. So malign means to say bad things about another person or a restaurant or a situation. Means that you're saying saying bad things about the person, which may or may not be true, which may or may not be exaggerated, but with the purpose of making that person or that thing lower or less or bad in the other people's eyes. To malign means to speak about someone in a spiteful, critical manner. So in the first example, it's saying, this reporter maligns the movie stars, right? Says bad things about them that are going to hurt them with other people. In the second example, when people get divorced, I have a friend of mine who, whenever he talks about his ex-wife, he doesn't have anything good to say, so he does malign her. But in this example, Stacy refuses to malign her husband. She refuses to say bad things about him to hurt his reputation or the way that people view him. Okay, all right, great. I'm sorry that this one went a little bit long, but go ahead and do the questions, and then bring any questions you have about any of these words to class. All right, see you then. Bye.